You're thinking about maybe moving to Montana or you're living in Montana and you kind of want to know what natural disaster could destroy your home? Well, we're going to talk about that in this video. Hi, welcome to the Montana Real Estate Channel, brought to you by Cyphers Family Real Estate. I'm Craig Cyphers and I work with my third generation realtor daughter, Erica, and we help people find homes in Montana, whether they're moving into the state of Montana or if they're moving around the state of Montana. And we'd like to be a resource for you. We get calls, emails, and texts nearly every day from folks just like yourself wanting to know information about Montana real estate, lifestyle, culture, and the things that affect your life if you happen to be living in Montana. So if you need to get a hold of us, you want to know more about a particular place in Montana, just tap that logo down there on the lower right-hand side of your page so you know more about whenever we post a new video about Montana and some of the real estate here or or things that could affect real estate. So today we're going to dive into what we believe is somewhat important, and that's talking about natural disasters in Montana. We're going to give you a few examples. Now, before we start packing your bags, let me assure you that Montana is an incredible place to live. And while we don't have hurricanes and earthquakes like they have in California, we do face our own unique challenges. And so let's take a look and dive right into this week's video. We just recently posted a video with regard to wildfires in Montana. But first, let's talk about what we don't have in Montana. We don't have hurricanes like Florida or Texas. You won't see tornadoes ripping through neighborhoods like we'll have, say, in Kansas. And we don't experience catastrophic flooding for the most part, like you might along the Mississippi River. But however, we do have, natural disasters. And let's talk about a few of them right now. On July 24th, 2024, Montana was hit by a fierce windstorm, straight line wind, and it was no joke. Hurricane force winds tore through Missoula, Stevensville, and Hamilton. Those winds were so fierce and violent that the governor, Greg Gianforte, declared Stevensville and Hamilton disaster areas. Let's take a look and see what the news had to say about it.
Delivers a knockout punch to western Montana. Upwards of 100-mile-per-hour straight-line winds in and around Missoula downed hundreds of trees, toppled many power lines, tore apart signs, and even caused around 10,000 homes to lose power. That storm even prompting Missoula police to make a plea for drivers to stay home due to all the stoplights being out. Take a look at some of the damage here. The storms rolled through the city and Bitterroot Valley last night, right around 10 o'clock, leaving severe damage in its wake. Northwestern Energy is working around the clock to restore power, but as of now, thousands do remain in the dark. We're also hearing from the University of Montana that it was hit hard by the storm, with tree limbs scattered around the campus. Dozens of vehicles across the city also damaged or destroyed by.
I ended up going down to check on a listing of mine, and here's what I found. So here we are at the banks of the Bitterroot River, and as you can see behind me, this is an example of what happened during that major windstorm. And this is a huge ponderosa tree, and there were tons of them that fell in the area. So right here is an example of the kinds of things that can happen with high winds, which is pretty rare. But in this particular case, this was almost hurricane wind velocity. Pretty obvious that if this tree had hit a house, it had caused a lot of damage. A house, a vehicle, or even an outbuilding. So you have to be aware of the foliage around you, the trees, what kind of condition there are. For example, in the Bitterroot Valley, there are a lot of large cottonwood type trees or poplars that have been in the ground for well over 100 years, and they tend to rot from the bottom and the inside. So although it looks like a healthy tree outside, it could actually topple quite easily in winds that are quite a bit less than what we experienced on the 24th of July here in the Bitterroot. And so look around when you're looking at your property, make sure your trees are trimmed and you'll avoid these kinds of damages. Montana does have tornadoes. They're pretty rare. They're generally kind of isolated to eastern Montana, although western Montana has what we call landspouts. You've no doubt heard of water spouts, but in mountainous areas and in some areas, like for example in Colorado, you'll have landspouts. Example of a landspout. This landspout is over the Mission Mountains outside of St. Ignatius, Montana, and you can see it is coming to the ground there. You can kind of see that. Tornadoes are relatively rare in Montana and certainly in western Montana. However, there was a pretty active tornado season back in 2010, and one of the more damaging tornadoes did touch down in Billings, Montana. And here's a little news coverage from national CBS News at the time back in 2010.
A section of Billings, Montana will be declared a disaster area this morning. A powerful tornado tore through the northeast part of the city yesterday afternoon, destroying a sports arena. Nikki Lorenzo of our Billings station, KTVQ, has the latest. Good morning, Nikki.
Good morning, Betty. We are outside one of the hardest hit areas here in Billings. Residents waking up to quite a mess. Rimrock Auto Arena was one of the hardest hit areas. It's the biggest venue in Montana. If anything big comes to Billings as far as concerts or the fair, it is held here. And although the twister caused catastrophic damage, officials are just happy there was no loss of life. The tornado touched down at about 4:45 Sunday afternoon.
It is destroying the metro.
It tore the roof off the Rimrock Auto Arena at Metro Park, tossing debris for 3/4 of a mile.
These trees were just uprooted like little toothpicks.
Police say the twister hovered over the building for 15 minutes.
That's where people are supposed to go during a civil defense emergency.
20 people at McDonald's took shelter in a walk-in freezer as the restaurant's glass front was blown in. A casino, a bar, and several other small businesses also suffered extensive damage. The tornado was accompanied by 135-mile-per-hour winds, heavy rain, and hail the size of a baseball. 2 1/4 inches of rain fell. That's 5 times the previous record rainfall. Then, as quickly as it came, the storm was gone. The sun was out a half hour after the tornado had struck. And this is a piece of the roof here at Rimrock Auto Arena. These were seen up to a mile in the air in the twister. Witnesses reported seeing this scattered all over Main Street here. The only injury that was reported was one man that was hit by baseball-sized hail. But luckily, no other injuries and no loss of life. Betty?
Even though they happen, tornadoes are not common. It's certainly not in western Montana, which is the bulk of our market area. However, they do occur from time to time. It's not likely that your house is going to be swept away like the Wizard of Oz. And flooding also can be a problem in various areas, depending on things like snowpack and that sort of thing. One of our larger floods most recently was in June of 2022, and it was highly publicized because it was in one of our great national parks, Yellowstone. So let's take a look at some of the devastation that took place in Yellowstone a couple of years ago. If you're enjoying our content, be sure to tap the logo down here on the lower right-hand side of your screen and like, subscribe, share, and we appreciate it. And then, speaking of Yellowstone, you'll definitely want to stay to the end of this video where we touch on something unbelievable that's taking place below the surface there. In the meantime, let's take a look at what the USGS had to say about the flooding there in Yellowstone in June of 2022. Between June 10th and 13th of 2022, an atmospheric weather event impacted the Yellowstone area. Now, you're not likely to get a ticket to that event, but it is something to see. Now, there was high snowpack combined with warm, moist air from the tropics, and that produced 2 to 3 inches of rain, helping to melt the snow. Now, this flood was unprecedented. There has been monitoring of the Yellowstone River since 1892, and there is a stream gauge at Corwin Springs. Corwin Springs is just north of the park, and the previous high water mark there at that gauge occurred in 1918, and it was at 11.5 feet, and that occurred in 1918, and the flow rate was 32,000 cubic feet per second. But on June 13th, the record was shattered when the flood level reached 14 feet and the flow rate was in excess of 50,000 cubic feet per second. Now that caused tremendous damage, of course, as you can see, to the road system in Yellowstone National Park, as well as destroying homes along the way, and terrific damage downstream. It impacted the communities. And this was considered a 500 to 1,000 year event. So it's not common, but floods do happen in Montana, and they will impact your property if you were in the path. Now, it's also not just spring flood. Sometimes ice jams will cause flooding. That'll happen, say, during the winter months. So when purchasing a property, it's wise to research the risk for flooding and mitigate the risk or transfer it with insurance. In California, of course, we have earthquakes like nowhere else in the United States, and naturally we have earthquakes in Montana as well. Not quite like we have in California, but let's take a look at the earthquake activity over the last 24 years or so. But before we do that, I've been in real estate business for nearly 4 decades, but my background and education is in geology, and so I know a little something about earthquakes and fault systems. That reminds me to remind you that my family has been helping folks with real estate transactions since 1966, and we like to think that Cypher's family knows a little something about real estate. If you enjoy our content on the Real Montana Real Estate channel, be sure to like, share, and subscribe by tapping that logo on the lower right-hand side of your screen so that you are notified whenever we come out with a new video on subjects that affect real estate in Montana, or discuss lifestyle in the Big Sky country or culture and happenings in the Treasure State. Is a map, an epicenter map, showing earthquakes and magnitudes since 2000. And as you can see, our concentration of earthquakes, and certainly those of any magnitude, are along the California coast here, and that's along the San Andreas Fault, goes up towards Northern California, then goes offshore and continues north until it gets up into Alaska. But the area of concern for us is an area that starts in southern Nevada and goes through the middle of Utah, through the Salt Lake area, up into the border of Montana and Wyoming, where about Yellowstone National Park, it takes off in 2 branches, one going to the west into central Idaho, and another going northwest through Montana. And this is called the Intermountain Seismic Belt, and the branch going to the west is known as the Centennial Tectonic Belt. Now, most of these earthquakes are relatively small. They are under the 4 on the Richter scale, and certainly the vast majority of them are less than 3.5 on the Richter scale. Faults documented on the U.S. Geological Survey database, and these faults show geological evidence of providing large earthquakes in the past 2 million years, and and probably within the last few 100,000 years, but are likely to have earthquake activity again in the future. And we can see here from this that we have a number of faults here below Glacier National Park along the eastern edge of Flathead Lake into the Swan Valley and up in the Bob Marshall Wilderness, and along the Bitterroot Range south of Missoula near Hamilton and Stevensville. And you can see the Bitterroot Range in those videos on Bitterroot communities. And then over near Helena, we have a number of fault system over there. And we talked about the damage occurring in that area on our Helena video. And those earthquakes took place in 1935. And there were a number of them that caused considerable damage in and around that area. And here are some examples of the damage that was sustained. And most of that was on masonry structures. The earthquake activity in Helena began in early October of 1935. This series of earthquakes started on October 12th. A magnitude 5.6 or so earthquake was experienced, but it didn't cause much damage. But on October 18th, a magnitude 6.3 earthquake occurred. And you can see from this isoseismal map that in the yellow area it was felt, in the orange area there was some damage, and of course in the bullseye there was significant damage. And the 2 weeks later on Halloween, a magnitude 6 point quake aftershock hit the area, and these are pictures of some of the damage that accompanied this the earthquake on the 18th primarily. As you can see, the masonry walls of second-story buildings did not fare well, and there were some that were totally destroyed by complete collapse. 60% of the buildings in Helena area suffered some sort of structural damage. This is a residence that lost the entire front of the home, which fell outward onto the porch, but you can still see the hot water radiators are still in place. And this building suffered a total loss, and there were 4 fatalities during this series and a swarm of earthquakes, all the result of falling debris. The Helena earthquake caused significant structural damage and loss of life. It's certainly not the largest earthquake that took place in Montana. That was the Hebgen Lake earthquake in August of 1959. In fact, it could be the largest earthquake in the Rocky Mountains. Let's take a look at a news report that was done on the 60th anniversary of the Hebgen Lake earthquake.
Saturday night at 11:35 marks the 60th anniversary of the largest earthquake ever recorded in the Rocky Mountains. It happened just west of Yellowstone National Park along the Madison River. MTN's John Shear explains how the massive 7.3 quake took lives and changed the landscape.
The power of this earthquake was immense. I'm standing a couple hundred feet above the old riverbed, which is underneath the waters of Quake Lake over here. It was all filled in by the 80 million tons of debris that came from that mountain right over there. These rocks you see either side of me are the size of houses. They came down with the slide, landing on the far side of the canyon, in just a matter of seconds.
We don't believe that earthquakes can get much larger in this region.
Books and articles have been written about this tragedy that claimed at least 28 lives. Most have something in common. They feature photos taken by 15-year-old John Owen. He was here in a vacation cabin with his family.
Thrown off the couch onto the floor.
Fearing the Hebgen Dam would burst after the quake, the owner of the resort told his guests to flee to nearby high ground.
And before long, there was just a stream of cars coming in.
250 people made their way to what was later named Refuge Point.
Right about dawn then, Dad said, "Here, take the camera, go take some pictures."
The massive landslide pushed a wave of air in front of it at 100 miles an hour, It swept one man away. It ripped the clothing right off another survivor.
You know, it's the human story that, you know, it's gut-wrenching to hear how some families were separated.
Parents killed by a giant rock while their 3 children survived.
It's also the geologic story. This is one of the largest landslides in North America.
It left the picturesque canyon a wasteland.
In the morning, it was like we were in a new world, like we'd been in one world in the campground and somebody picked us up and put us on a different planet.
Those 250 people were stranded in this strange new world. To the west, the only road was under that 250-foot pile of debris, while to the east, the road had disappeared into Hebgen Lake.
Middle of the morning, a plane flies over and a couple of smoke jumpers come out.
It was like rescue from the sky.
They brought medical supplies, food, and a radio, leading to one of John's most memorable photos.
One guy's taking a real careful step, but in the background, the mountain over here, here's dust falling down. It was an aftershock.
Aftershocks would have been major earthquakes in their own right.
There were 3 aftershocks bigger than magnitude 6.5.
Heard accounts of the ground essentially didn't stop trembling the night of the earthquake.
The Air Force sent rescue helicopters to take out the seriously injured, while a highway construction crew working to the east jumped into action.
So late on the 18th, there was a road, more or less, where cars could drive out.
15-year-old John Owen was living an adventure. He was not the least bit frightened.
And it took me a while till I realized the significance of the disaster here at the slide for me to calm down a little bit.
Some, like Irene Bennett and her son, the only survivors from a family of 6, took decades to get over the trauma.
Probably 35 years, and they've never been back to this area. And we walked up to the memorial boulder, and they pointed out where they were camped. It was very emotional, but it brought closure to her.
Just behind me here, under the water and maybe 100 feet down, is the site of the old Rock Creek campground. Then in front of me is where the slide happened. It sent trees and rock and debris crashing through the sleeping campers. Some escaped and some suffered serious injuries, but 19 people never made it out. They're still here, buried under a mountain of rubble. At Quake Lake, near Yellowstone National Park, I'm John Shearer for MTN News.
Well, that earthquake and the slide that took place afterwards was surely an incredible event. But almost 20 years later, on Mother's Day, May 18th, 1980, something else happened. Remember this one? That's right, it was Mount St. Helens. Blew the entire top of the mountain off. You'd expect something like that in Hawaii, Indonesia, maybe even Iceland. But in Washington State? Now, thank goodness we don't have any volcanoes in Montana, or do we? Well, the volcano I'm going to reference is technically in Wyoming. But like any neighbor, they can potentially affect your property values. And in this case, it's a supervolcano, and specifically, it's the Yellowstone supervolcano in the northwest part of Wyoming. That's right, a supervolcano right next door. The Yellowstone supervolcano has erupted 3 times in the last 2.1 million years, and it makes Mount St. Helens look like a piker. The last eruption was approximately 640,000 years ago, which means the next one might just be around the corner. Well, geologically speaking. The current magma chamber is 30 miles long, 25 miles wide, and 10 miles in depth. And if this baby blows, it will literally be lights out for much of Montana, no matter where you live. Now, Mount St. Helens exploded some 7 billion tons of ash into the atmosphere, blowing ash about 15 miles into the sky and having the power of approximately 500 Hiroshima nuclear bombs. The resulting pyroclastic flows traveling up to 300 plus miles per hour at 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit would wipe out everything within a 100-mile radius, like Livingston and Bozeman. Here's a look at the area of devastation, and this is a graphic example next of the volcanic explosivity of a Yellowstone eruption relative to other eruptions. Ash would cover a tremendous area, reaching up into the atmosphere and changing weather patterns, much like Tambora's eruption in 1815, when it was the year Earth went without a summer. There would be famine and disease and pestilence and social upheaval. Well, other than that, it would maybe be survivable, but probably not in Montana. The good news? Well, it's likely that it won't happen for another 100,000 years. Get out your checkbook and meet me at the closing table. So Montana is a great place to live, and we'd like to be a resource for you in that process. The Cyphers family has been helping folks move into the path of pyroclastic debris since 1966. Reach out to us. All the information you need is in the description below. And be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And until next time, stay out of disaster.